Ahoy! The second wave of the new world PTR is coming out today, and it once again has some very interesting changes. This one especially one for PvE. Of course, this is also coming with the Sandworm raid, so very big deal there, and also with a new event. First, we have a variety of general quest fixes and other things that are just minor bugs for the most part. Then we have a change to the depth, reducing the health of Apocalypse mines in the mutator mode. This is interesting because they already nerfed Thorpe as well by fixing his back cleave, so it seems that depth just didn't have enough people running it or not enough consistent good clears for them to think it's balanced, so they're kind of just adjusting it here and there. But here is a very important change. Revised Expedition Elite enemies, specifically, not open world mobs, to remove pushback applied from player attacks that don't cause a stagger. So, for example, light attacks. This is very interesting because, for example, I often use my spear light attacks to push mobs towards the clump if they're just a little bit off, like especially ranged enemies. Usually you can go behind them, use some abilities, use some light attacks and push them into the group so you can better AoE them. So it looks like this will no longer be possible now, which will affect balance in some ways, I guess, when it comes to efficient clear, but also has a significant upside of mobs being locked in place somewhat more and making your basic attacks hit more consistently on them because they're not getting pushed around as much while in a larger group. So overall, I think for most weapons and most use cases, it will probably be a benefit because mobs just stay closer together if you swing at them with a greatsword AoE, for example, but in some outlier cases, it might be a bit of a downside. In War, attackers should no longer have the issue where they're not able to buy siege weapons, and in 33 arenas, they removed one of the voice lines where Thorpe talks at the start about dredging up more challenges, blah blah blah, which is just a very long and unnecessary one. So I'm glad they're removing that, but at the same time, we're not having that arena right now. We have the other one anyways, where there is no voice line for that as far as I'm aware, so it doesn't really change anything in that regard, I suppose. Some people were not able to get their Azos staff to Legendary, still, apparently, so that's fixed. And some people were not able to get max rank faction tokens. This is being increased anyways, though, in the next change here. So the cap for faction tokens at all levels is doubled, which is also good on lower levels because it was always kind of annoying. The cap was always pretty low. The new cap at maximum reputation is now 150,000, which makes sense with some of the new rewards being more expensive in terms of tokens as well. All jewelry has been renamed to exemplary jewelry. I'm not quite sure why, but oh well. And the Weaver's Fen faction control bonus has been changed from 10% global tax value to 10% global refining yield, which is one of the best buffs that we have, which was previously on First Light, but since First Light is not accessible, they had to put that somewhere else for now. Weapon weight gets changes too. There was actually a funny bug here first, and there was an extra 0 on all of these because of the systems they use internally. So it looked like every weapon was going to be super heavy, and greatswords would be 85 weight, but that's not what's happening. They missed a decimal there essentially. So these are the actual new weights. You can see, for example, swords at 3, greatswords at 8.5, just to have a bit of a reference point here. To give you an idea, for example, hybrids, like weapons didn't have a consistent weight before between them. It was different from weapon to weapon. But for example, hybrids, one of the great swords that you could get, had 12.8 weight before and now will be 8.5. Generally, I think most weapons here will be lighter and take up less weight in the inventory, which is going to be especially nice for expedition runs, where after the run you always have to clear out all your weapons very quickly because otherwise it will clog up your inventory so much. So I think this is a good change, and it being more consistent here is also nice. There was never any benefit to those different weights on weapons. Equipment items that drop in the world of Eternum have been updated to use new perk buckets based on content types. So players should no longer see perks like Resilient, Family Ward, so Ward types, and Banes dropping together on gear. So following these changes, you can now replace gems in Invasion and Breach Closer trinkets as well, and they fixed some inconsistencies of some families of AI rolled perk when providing loot. All AI families should now roll loot more consistently. I didn't even know this was a problem. So yeah, no more Resilient and Ward together, and there are also some other changes when it comes to the rewards here. Corrupted Breaches have been updated with new armor and weapons. These will always roll one family Bane. I'm assuming they just roll Corrupted Bane, probably, or Ward perk when they drop for players, so that's locked. And they use the appearance of the previous Corruption Breach items. The old armored weapons will no longer drop, and new elite items can drop as well, plus the Bane one, craft mods as well. So, very interesting. I think they can actually drop all Bane and Ward craft mods. I was looking at that the other day because I was talking about Beast Ward, and it seems that Corruption Breach caches can in fact roll Beast Ward craft mods too. So this may be a decent way to get them after the patch, since they don't have a native drop location. This is at least one way to get some more if you want to farm them. The loot from the breach caches has been updated quite significantly, and some of those are pretty decent now. The first one is Glacial Rage and Ice Gauntlet that previously was just below 590 gear score in the first place at that kind. Now it has Pylon Burst, Angry Earth Bane and Keenly Empowered. Not the best, because Keenly Empowered would go away if you switch to another weapon, so it's not really good for an offhand, but not the worst either. Moonless Knight previously had Rogue, Mortal Lifesteal and Keenly Fortified. Mortal Lifesteal has been replaced with Human Bane, which makes this a pretty solid starter sword for DPS at least. Keenly Fortified is obviously not a BIS perk for a DPS sword, but two good perks and one that is at least slightly beneficial. Portal Smasher, which previously had Mortal Lifesteal, has been swapped to Enchanted. Most of these are actually mortal perks that they're removing. It still has Refreshing Ward, which is technically an illegal perk, and it still has Chain Lightning. This is an okay hammer for wars, I would say, if you don't necessarily want to have Sundering Shockwave on your weapon itself. Refreshing Ward on your weapon, not terrible on a hammer in particular, where Refreshing Move is not that great, and Chain Lightning is quite nice. Enchanted is not the best, but still, for a starter weapon for wars, this is kind of solid. Assuming you are playing a heavy bruiser in the first place. Flames of the Breach, a fire staff, had two perks removed, Mortal Fortification and Keenly Fortified. It now has Refreshing Evasion, Keenly Empowered and Empowering Incinerate. Refreshing Evasion obviously still an illegal perk here, but generally definitely a lot more appealing than before at least. Incinerate still not particularly valued by most though, so I don't think this will be a particularly popular one. Dark of Night had its Mortal Lifesteal swapped to Keenly Jagged, so it's Chain Void, Keenly Jagged and Sure Footing. I think even with the block changes on a Great Axe in particular, Sure Footing is not going to be particularly valuable, so I don't see this being all that good. When they come, a Rapier had its Mortal Fortification swapped to Keenly Jagged, but it still has Refreshing Ward and Chain Void along with that. Don't think there's any purpose for that one. The Breach Bloodied Rifle Musket had Mortal Lifesteal swapped to Refreshing Power Shot, which makes it an Ancient Bane, Refreshing Power Shot and Vorpal Musket. Very close to almost useful, I would say, if you are running Ennead, and Musket is getting some buffs that make it a little bit more effective for PvE as well, I think, a little bit. Problem is, they put Refreshing Power Shot on it, which is just completely useless on the last bosses in Ennead, so probably still not much of a use here. It's just very, very, very niche application, I think. Frostbitten Mid had Siphoning Blows swapped to Unbroken Winds and Mortal Refreshment swapped to Keenly Jagged. If you're an Unbroken Winds enjoyer, if you're a next patch build enjoyer and you want to try out Windchill next patch, this would actually be a pretty decent weapon. You have a lot of damaging perks on here, especially because typical perks won't benefit you as much with an Ice Gauntlet when you can't use something like Enchanted if you're mainly focusing on Windchill as much, so maybe there's a use case here. We'll have to see what people make of Windchill next patch, really. Cannonade is a new blunderbuss with Vorpal, Shirking Abyss and Enchanted, which unfortunately isn't all that great because Vorpal is not very effective with the crit multiplier that blunderbuss has. Otherwise, Shirking Abyss on Enchanted is at least okay, I would say, in a blondie. Crafting with Infused Orbs at the Gypsum Kiln will now grant a small amount of a seasonal XP, not that that really matters much. Then we have a bunch of minor fixes here, but there's once again a Musket fix in here. Increase the Musket reticle marker speed to improve clarity during chaotic battles. I don't know how to exactly interpret that, but I'm very curious what it will mean, so we'll find out soon. We'll test that, of course, and then we know more about it. Tomorrow we'll be talking probably about the Sandworm again in my experience, but I also have some more stuff about changes from the PTR lined up, so that's coming too. Consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you haven't yet, if you want to get notified. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. QoL, out.